There is a specific kind of ache that is hard to explain to someone who has never felt it. It arrives quietly, usually when you are doing something ordinary, reading a book, drifting off before sleep, watching rain move across a window. And what you feel is something that resembles homesickness, that hollow pull in the chest, that sense of being separated from somewhere warm and familiar. Except when you try to locate the place, you cannot. It is not your childhood home. It is not a city you visited once and loved. It is somewhere that never existed outside of your own mind, and yet the longing feels completely real. Some people feel this for the world of a novel they finished months ago. Some feel it for a version of a city they have never visited, but have imagined so thoroughly it has streets and weather and a particular quality of afternoon light. Some feel it for a life they scripted in their head during a hard year, a quiet house somewhere, a different version of things, a world that ran parallel to this one but never quite materialized. And when they reach for it now, it is gone, or rather, it was never there to reach for in the first place. That is what makes it so disorienting. The grief is real, but the place it belongs to is not. This experience even has a name, though most people have never heard it applied to themselves. Psychologists and researchers who study imagination and emotional attachment sometimes call it a form of place attachment, the same mechanism that creates genuine homesickness, except pointed inward at a constructed rather than a physical location. The broader feeling of longing for something beautiful that may never have been real has long been called by the Portuguese word saudade, and more recently, some researchers have connected it to what they call a wishful version of nostalgia. Not nostalgia for what was, but for what almost was, or what was only ever possible. What is happening at a psychological level is worth understanding slowly. The brain does not draw a sharp line between real experience and vividly imagined experience in the way we might assume it does. When you imagine a place with enough detail and enough emotional investment, your brain builds a representation of it using many of the same structures it uses for actual memory. The hippocampus, which plays a central role in forming and retrieving memories, is also deeply involved in imagination and in what researchers call mental time travel, the ability to project yourself forward or backward in time. Vivid imagining and genuine remembering can feel neurologically similar, which is part of why imagined places can carry emotional weight that feels indistinguishable from the weight of real ones. There is also the matter of what these places represent. When someone builds an imagined world and then grieves its absence, they are rarely grieving the physical details. They are grieving something else that the place was standing in for. Safety, maybe. A version of themselves that felt more whole. A period of life when things were simpler or when possibility had not yet narrowed. The invented place becomes a container for something emotional that did not have anywhere else to live. This is especially common in people who spent a significant portion of childhood or adolescence reading deeply, or who developed rich inner lives as a way of managing environments that felt unpredictable or difficult. If the real world was complicated, the imagined one was controllable. You could build it to be gentle. You could populate it with people who were kind. Over time, that constructed world became a place of genuine emotional refuge. And when you moved away from it, the way you move away from anything, as life demands more of your attention, it left a gap. The longing that follows is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that your imagination was doing real emotional work. You can see this play out in recognizable ways. Someone finishes a long novel series and feels a grief that surprises them in its depth. They are not sad that the story ended. They are sad because they have to leave. The world in those pages had a texture, a set of rules, a feeling of being known, and now the door is closed. Or someone describes lying awake at 14, imagining a version of their future, a particular apartment, a particular kind of morning, a particular feeling of arrival, and decades later they still feel a faint ache when they remember it, even though that future was always only a story they were telling themselves to get through the week. Or consider the person who spent years building an elaborate internal world while commuting or doing solitary work, a place they return to in small increments over months, adding detail, adding feeling, adding a sense of history to it. When circumstances changed and the quiet time disappeared, so did the access to that place. And they miss it the way you miss a real place you cannot return to. What is worth understanding here is that this kind of longing is not escapism in the dismissive sense that word is often used. The imagination is not a lesser faculty than reason. It is one of the primary ways human beings process emotion, rehearse possibility, and make meaning out of difficult circumstances. When someone builds a place in their mind that feels safe or beautiful or whole, they are doing something genuinely meaningful. The grief of losing access to it deserves to be treated as real grief, not dismissed as confusion between fantasy and reality. The gentle shift worth offering here is this. Rather than feeling embarrassed about the longing, or trying to convince yourself it is irrational, you might instead ask what that imagined place was holding for you. What quality of life did it represent that you were hungry for? Was it stillness? Was it belonging? Was it a version of yourself you felt more settled being? Because those needs are real, even when the place was not. And real needs can be addressed in real places, not always perfectly, not in one move, but genuinely. If the imagined world represented safety, then the question becomes, where do you find that now? If it represented beauty, then where do you let yourself experience that? If it represented a version of you that you liked better, then what was that version doing differently, and is any of that reachable? The invented place was a map in a sense, not to itself, but to something you were already looking for. Reading the map carefully is worth the time. There is also something worth sitting with in the simple fact that you built it in the first place. The capacity to create a place that feels real, to give it light and texture and emotional meaning, is not a small thing. It means your inner life is genuinely rich. It means you are someone who processes the world with imagination and depth. That is not a flaw to be corrected. It is a form of intelligence that deserves to be understood and taken seriously. None of this is a substitute for real support if the longing feels heavy or persistent, and if it is tangled up with grief or difficulty that is hard to carry. Speaking with a therapist is worth considering. What is offered here is general reflection, not personal guidance. But for most people, most of the time, this particular ache is asking a quieter question. It is asking where you feel at home, not in the literal sense of a building or a city, but in the deeper sense. Where do you feel like yourself? Where does the noise inside you settle? Where do things feel like they fit? The imagined place knew the answer, even if the answer was incomplete. It was built out of your own sense of what you needed, which means you already know more about that than you might think. The places we make up are not failures of perception. They are attempts at something real. They are the mind doing its best work under whatever conditions it was given, constructing somewhere to rest, somewhere to breathe, somewhere to rehearse being a version of yourself that felt possible. When you miss them, you are not confused. You are remembering something that mattered, even if it only ever lived in you. And that, quietly, is not nothing. That is quite a lot. If something in this felt familiar, it would mean a great deal to have you subscribe. There is more waiting here whenever you need it.